And I have to say, I'm especially proud and honored to be here at Politics and Prose because I've been coming here a long time. My twin sister literally lives a stone's throw. And so this bookstore means a lot to us. And I have to say, the book has been receiving some recognition of late. But Barbara and the store invited us and agreed to have us before any of that recognition came. And so I feel like you're a bit of an angel investor, or at least an early adopter.
We wanted to have you so badly. We like the book so much.
Thank you. So here I am, and here's Searching for Whitopia, and here you guys are. What I'll do is I'll speak about the book for 20 minutes, and then I'll entertain some questions. And I want to begin by just describing what I did and how I came to write this book and what it involved. And then I want to share with you some of my insights I learned writing the book. Between 2007 and 2009, I embarked on a 27,000-mile journey to the fastest growing whitest communities in America. And I've called them Whitopia. To my mind, Whitopia has three traits. The first is that since the year 2000, they have grown by at least 6% in population. The second trait is that the majority of that growth has come from white migrants. And the third trait is more difficult to define. Whitopias have a pleasant look and feel, a social charm. I guess you could call it a je ne sais quoi. And so, as Barbara mentioned, I list in the back very thoroughly every county in this country that qualifies as a Whitopia. And there's upwards of nearly 300 of them. So I decided to take three such places as representative samples and to embed myself in these communities for 3 to 4 months apiece during the years 2007 to 2009. The first of those communities was St. George, Utah. The second was Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And the third was Forsyth County, Georgia. Starting with St. George, Utah. In case you have, first of all, how many people here have been to St. George, Utah? Anybody?
I have.
You have?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Maybe I should ask you to describe how beautiful it is. St. George, Utah is an hour and a half north of Los Angeles. Now, if you can just picture the beautiful Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Thank you. Las Vegas, Nevada, not Los Angeles. I said Los Angeles because there's a lot of migrants going from LA to St. George. But in fact, it's an hour and a half north of Las Vegas, Nevada. If you can just picture the color-rich red canyon walls of the Grand Canyon, you can imagine how geographically gorgeous St. George is. In terms of golfing, it has one of the most golf courses per capita of any town in America. And so there I was in St. George, Utah. I did a lot of socializing in St. George, Utah. As Barbara mentioned, I threw dinner parties, and I had people over. I rented a villa in the Entrada, which is one of the most prestigious gated communities in St. George. And by the way, the reason I embedded myself in these communities is because I cannot understand or I cannot imagine how one would get a spirit of a place or the essence of a people without actually living there. I didn't want to pull this out of my butt from an armchair in New York City and say, these are how these people are. And so that's what I did. So going back to St. George, Utah, another element of my socializing is I fell in with a poker crew. And every week we'd play Texas Hold'em, and there was a $10 buy-in. And so I say this because the socializing was a big element of how I got to acclimate myself to these communities. And beyond the socializing, I attended a lot of community-related meetings. I attended the local county Republican meetings. I attended county zoning meetings, county planning meetings, because many of these communities are growing quickly. And I also attended a meeting called the Citizens Council Against Illegal Immigration in St. George, Utah. And I think I was caught a little bit off guard about how hot, how contentious an issue illegal immigration is in St. George, Utah. And I followed the founder of this organization. And so, one theme that really emerged in St. George, Utah, which I'll speak about more in depth, is the idea of illegal immigration. So, that's St. George, Utah. The next Whitopia I visited is Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Coeur d'Alene, Idaho is listed in Patricia Schultz's book, 1,000 Places to See Before You Die. And indeed, I came to find out that it is a sportsman's paradise. There's a lot of fishing, a lot of hunting, a lot of golfing in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Two things I'd like to say about Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, just describing to you the most memorable experiences I had in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. The first is that there is an expatriate community of retired LAPD officers who've decamped to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, especially after the Rodney King riots of 1992, the most famous of which is, of course, Mark Furman. Mark Furman is of OJ fame, is living in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And so I interviewed the cops. I got to know why they're there, what the community is like there. And I think they're pretty tight-knit. They're a tight-knit community that bowls together, that has potlucks together, that has golf tournaments together. And the second most memorable time in Coeur d'Alene was when I visited the Christian Identity Church. And for those of you who don't know, Christian Identity is the religious arm of Aryan nations. And they have an outpost a little up the road from Coeur d'Alene in Sandpoint, Idaho. And I wanted to see what they're about. In other words, I feel that a lot of white anthropologists have gone, quote unquote, to the inner city or gone, quote unquote, to the ghetto, or at least they write about it without actually talking to the people who live there. So I didn't want to repeat that mistake in reverse. I didn't want to talk or discuss with people that I had never met. And so there I was at the Christian Identity Aryan Nations outpost. And you know, as a black person in that kind of environment, you can become a bit wary. So I heard some interesting conversations there. What the retreat comprised is a lot of political sermons, a lot of religious sermons, and a lot of socializing on the porch between those sermons, coffee breaks. And two white separatists were speaking. One had been affiliated to David Duke, and he was complaining. He was saying, that David Duke, he talks a big game, he calls himself a nationalist, but he only has 2 kids. Educated Aryans need to have more kids. David Duke has only 2 kids. Now that particular gentleman had 10 kids. So that's the flavor of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. The last thing I'll say about my visit to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho is that, call me naive, but I realized the extent to which class can riven this country and the extent to which this book is more about class than it is about race. And that even in a homogeneous white community, you can have a stark class divide. And this expressed itself quite sharply even in the span of one afternoon when in the early afternoon I was hanging out with a guy I had befriended called Ed. After knowing Ed for 2 weeks, I came to learn that Ed could not afford an apartment, and therefore he was living out of a rented storage unit in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, because he could not afford the real estate there. That very afternoon, I went to the sprawling estate of Shelley and Ron, who are 3rd-generation cattle barons, and their guest that afternoon was U.S. Senator Mike Crapo. They were having a meet and greet for Senator Crapo, and during that meet and greet, everyone complained about taxes, and the senator promised the gathering more tax relief. So I thought that was a very telling, poignant idea of how A, taxes, or too many taxes, are a big issue in Whitopia, and B, how you can have a class divide. And so often, especially in a community like this, we talk about gentrification in terms of, oh, white folks are moving into these urban neighborhoods and they're gentrifying it, but also realize that white people can gentrify working class white neighborhoods also. And I'd be in a bar and people would say, because these communities, these Whitopias have become so expensive, and this is a local 3rd-generation sharing an experience saying, I will not be able to raise my kids in the very community I grew up in. So class is a big issue in this book.